an unabridged recording of Downriver by Will Hobbs, narrated by Christina Moore.
Chapter 1. I stumbled on a rock that was barely sticking up. My legs were that tired. Flailing for balance, with the pack working against me, I slipped in the mud and almost went down. I still couldn't believe this was really happening. I couldn't believe my dad had done this to me. For 5 days, Al had been leading us into the most rugged corners of the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado, coaxing and pushing us over the passes and into the peaks, through good weather and bad weather, mostly through bone-freezing rain and sleet. "October in the mountains," Al said with a grin. "You live a whole lot closer to the edge." The going was always either straight up or straight down. We rarely followed trails. There were 8 of us, 4 guys and 4 girls, including me, all serving 9 weeks in this outdoor education school from hell. Al called his program Discovery Unlimited, but we called it Hoods in the Woods, the name we inherited from the previous waves of misfits who'd come through the place. Al kept us marching all day under heavy packs, grinding us down in preparation for what? He would never say when you asked him. He'd only reply with a wink or a knowing grin. Hike, freeze, starve, break out the ropes and carabiners, and risk your life every day. For what? "Just a mile till camp, guys," Al said. "Think about a sunny day." I couldn't. I could see nothing but the frightening dark tunnel that was my future. I saw no images there, no hopes, only blackness. All my happy images lay in the past, all the happy scenes with my dad when it was just the 2 of us. I tried to dwell on the good times as I walked, but those pictures, those voices, only intensified my feeling of loss and left me staring once again into that black tunnel. "How's it going?" Suddenly Troy was walking at my side. "Okay, I guess. You don't look so happy." "I'm ready to be in camp. When Al says a mile, you know it's 2 or 3. It's part of his charm." We jumped a little creek and started up a steep slope. Soon neither of us had enough breath to speak, but thinking about Troy took my mind off me. He seemed much older than the rest of us, just from the way he carried himself. It was like he was sizing up this whole situation from the outside. I'd been wondering if he was going to be friendly, and now it seemed he was. Camp, at last. I found a dry spot under a tree and eased my back against its trunk. Troy sought me out and sat cross-legged up close. "Does the climbing scare you, Jessie?" He was looking at me with the calmest and clearest blue eyes I'd ever seen. "Yes," I allowed, looking away. "I thought so." He said it knowingly, in a way that promised help. When I looked back to his eyes, they kind of locked onto mine and wouldn't let go. Apparently he never needed to blink, and he wasn't going to look away. His eyes seemed to be challenging me to what? "I'm doing okay so far." His eyes let me go. For now, I thought. I was fascinated by him. Someone was yelling that he was supposed to be one of the cooks. Troy reluctantly unwound his long legs and said, "Catch you later." We drew in close to the campfire that night, putting off, as always, the moment when we'd have to get into our freezing bags and face the shivering hours of the night. We knew Al would make his speech about the next day, and of course he did as he poked the fire. "We've got the climbing skills down now, guys. It's time for a true test. After that, we'll head back to base camp for hot showers, real food, and our beds." I pictured the little log cabin that I shared with Star, and how good it would be to stoke the pot-bellied stove until the stovepipe turned red. So what was this big test going to be? "Tomorrow," Al announced, "you're going to climb Storm King Peak, elevation 13,752 feet, and it's no puppy. You'll know you've accomplished something. We'll draw straws this evening for climbing partners. Troy, you're going to be the navigator. You haven't led yet." "Nothing against Troy," Rita said in her nasal, right-at-you New York accent. But if this Storm King is such a big deal, why not let Freddie lead? We know he's good at it. I glanced over at Freddie. The campfire light flickering on his deep brown skin, black eyes, and shaggy black hair revealed, as usual, nothing in the way of response. True, I thought, he's capable, but he's practically mute. I'd much rather follow Troy. I had reason to believe that Troy cared whether I lived or died. Al was shaking his head emphatically as he spread the topographic map out on the ground. Troy will do just fine. He's your leader for the climb. Star, you're shivering. Come into the light and warm yourself up. Folks, everybody needs to develop these skills, every one of you. Sometimes there isn't going to be anybody else around. But we travel in a pack, Adam pointed out with his trademark mischievous grin. Our redhead loved nothing better than sidetracking a conversation. So whoever's going to lead can study the map, and the rest of us followers can go to bed. Seconded, said Pug, the big fella, stretching one giant leg out toward the fire and nudging a piece of wood into its center. Al scratched behind an ear, amid the wiry gray hair that stuck out beneath his wool cap. He was rocking slightly on his haunches. He preferred to squat rather than pull up a log or a rock. He reminded me in his body language of an aborigine or a tribesman from the Amazon, right out of one of the slideshows my dad used in his anthropology classes. Sometimes, Al said slowly, sometimes self-reliance is the key to survival. But other times, cooperation is. Let's everybody study this map, and then tomorrow, on the mountain, we'll pool our knowledge. Whenever somebody's wondering if you're doing the right thing, bring it up with Troy. What if the right thing, the way we figure it, would be to go into Silverton for burgers, suggested Adam. Everyone had a smile or a laugh, including Al. With Adam, there was never anything at stake. He was so easy. I could sense Heather getting ready to object, and I braced myself for her voice, which I found jarring and oddly mismatched with her broad shoulders. When she thought something was unfair, which was most of the time, her voice rose even higher than its usual pitch, and her speech came out squeaking and gasping, because she couldn't talk and breathe at the same time when she was upset. What I don't get is, we can all cooperate on the climb, right? Except for you, Al. You won't help us at all, right? That's what this is all about, Heather. You guys have the skills now. You make the decisions, you make the choices, you live by the consequences. You'll be on your own. I'll just tag along for the scenery. Troy, I noticed, was attending to all this, watching, listening, but withholding comment. Everybody was looking to him, including Al. Troy was a heavy, and everybody knew it. We were all wondering when he'd take Al on, but he was holding back. When Heather saw that Troy wasn't going to respond, she said in that voice like an abused violin string, You say we get to make the decisions, but really we're just puppets, and you're manipulating us. I don't like your rules, Al. I can't accept that you get to make them all up. Who gave you that right? That's telling him, I thought. That's exactly how I feel. This guy reminds me of my dad. Right on, sister, thundered Pug, who was only half listening, his attention focused, as usual, on his biceps. Despite the cold, he was wearing a t-shirt cut off at the shoulders and was admiring the firelight's reflection on his muscles. Without thinking about it, he proceeded to punch Troy playfully in the arm. Maybe it was Pug's way of showing gratitude to his buddy for bestowing his nickname, the big fella. Why don't you blow your whistle, Heather? Suggested Adam with his wide, ironic grin. Blow your whistle, loud and clear. When you blew your whistle, it meant you wanted out. It meant you were going home. I'd been wondering all week when somebody was going to do it. I'd sure thought about it, about getting out of this place. But I figured out why I hadn't done it. Aside from not wanting to be first, I would have had to face what I'd be going back to. Was there home back there for any of us? I could only answer for myself. As for the others, their lives were mysteries. We were as far apart as galaxies in the night sky. Star and I shared a cabin back at base camp, yet I had little sense of what kept her going. She seemed so frail, I'd have guessed she'd be the first to blow her whistle. If the last week had been torture for me, what must it have been for her? Some stayed up into the night, talking by the firelight. Heather, Rita, Adam, and Pug. And the rest of us either listened without comment or tuned out. Star was in a trance-like state, and I was far away in my mind, reliving an awful day less than 2 weeks past that was a wound I was sure would never stop bleeding. I was back in my bedroom upstairs in my house, the same bedroom that was mine even before my mother died back when I was 5, and there was only an hour to go before Dad said we had to leave for the airport. I was looking at all my kid stuff, clutching my time-worn teddy that I'd named Pistachio for no particular reason when I was little. I was trying to lose myself in the old photographs on the walls. Only one photo of my mom, lots of me, but mostly pictures of me and my dad together, at Disneyland with Goofy, on horseback in the mountains, at the beach, all over. I stood by my bed, holding on for dear life to the brass rails and looking out the dormer onto the street. I thought of how many times I'd planned to escape by way of the window out onto the limbs of the elm tree, but instead slipped out the kitchen door because it was so much easier, and because Dad wasn't catching on anyway. Now, within an hour, I'd be leaving my home forever, and Dad would pack everything up in boxes, including all my things in this room, and he would move on with his life to the canyon home he'd designed with his girlfriend, and this life I'd known would all be swept away. As for me, he was sending me away. No matter how much he denied it, that's what he was doing, and I threw it back in his face 100 times. He just wanted to believe the therapist who told him this was what I needed, to discover myself, learn my limits, all that psych talk. It just made him feel better about getting rid of me. More time for him and Madeline. "It's only 9 weeks, Jessie," he said. "And it's not like you don't love the mountains. You like hiking, remember?" Hiking? I could hardly believe he was still trying to sell me this propaganda. "This is a program for juvenile delinquents, Dad. It's not summer camp." "There'll be different kinds of kids there, Jessie. This program is one of the best in the country. Your school counselor, your therapist, we all think it'll help you find yourself, rediscover the wonderful girl you used to be, help you grow up. I know growing up is hard. I remember." "This is all Madeline's idea, isn't it, Dad? Admit it. You know she's friends with my counselor at the high school." We'd had this argument so many times before I knew which lines came next. "That's not true. Madeline cares about you too. We're worried about your safety, Jessie. We don't want you to get hurt, or to hurt someone else." You'd think no one had ever rolled a car before. It was an accident, one that could have happened to anyone, and not just to a kid either. The police had blown it all out of proportion. We weren't drunk, and we were way out in the country, where there shouldn't have been any other cars. "You're worried about what people will think of you at the university because your daughter is hanging around with bad company. That's it, and you know it. The big professor. Just because my friends look different, you think they're not good enough for me." "Jessie, there's a lot you don't know about those guys. I see them on campus, and I know more about them than you do. They're too old for you, honey. You're just a sophomore in high school." "I was a sophomore in high school. I told you I'm not going back. I hate that place." "Jessie, what can I do? You tell me. You don't come home? You've been in 2 car accidents, and you're not even old enough to have your driver's license yet. The school calls constantly. You aren't in classes. And this is just the first month of school. Last year you did so well. I don't understand, Jessie, and you're scaring me. I'm afraid of what you'll do next." In a perverse way, I liked that part, about how I was scaring him. I knew I was. and it went straight to my head to know what I could do to him. The bitter things I'd said over the past months were nothing compared to what I said in our last week. When I heard myself saying, "I hate you," I swallowed hard, but I never took it back. I wanted him to suffer, and I knew him well enough to know that's exactly what he was doing. Then the time arrived. I heard my dad call from downstairs, "It's time to go, Jessie." And then I burst into tears, desperate to hold on to everything I was losing. I would never stand in this room again, never sleep in this bed again, never look out these windows again. I had a picture of my dad and me in my hands. I threw it down onto the hardwood floor, and the glass broke with a finality that frightened me and seemed to push me over the edge. Every one of those pictures of the two of us, I threw them down onto the floor, and every time it made things worse. I was breaking my own heart over and over again. Suitcases in hand, I walked down the stairs into the house that was holding its breath. My eyes were all cried out. My cat was at the bottom of the stairs at the front door, eyes darting from me to the door and back, frightened and wanting out. Dad was sitting there on the couch, his heart all broken, and I said into the silence as coldly as I could, "Let's go." The awful silence captured every moment as the familiar streets and neighborhoods disappeared behind us. For my part, I was fighting in the most hurtful way I could think of, by feeding the silence and making it grow and grow. I knew how badly my dad was hurting. There was nothing he could say. He needed to hear a word of understanding, a word of forgiveness from me, but there was no way I was going to provide it. As we got out of the car at the airport parking lot, my dad tried again. "Al, the guy that runs the program, believes that our culture lacks a ritual by which young people can decisively achieve adulthood, and that's why a lot of us never seem to grow up. It makes a lot of—" "Save it for your graduate students," I said. Inside, we were striding briskly down the concourse. I looked straight ahead, down into that black tunnel that was my future. Again, we couldn't speak, until we reached the door that opened out onto the runway, where the little flying culvert was waiting, when my dad hugged me and cried and said, "Jessie, I love you." I forced myself to look at him and said, "Yeah, well, give my regards to Madeline." And I broke away from his grasp and walked out to the commuter plane without looking back. Chapter 2. The night before Storm King, I got no rest. I was whirling and tumbling inside the car with the world spinning out of control all around. I woke up and took a drink from the water bottle between Star and me. It was pitch dark, still the middle of the night. When I got back to sleep, I was climbing a mountain with Troy and some people who weren't even in our group. I kept saying that we should turn back, we were late for something, but Troy wouldn't. Then I slipped and was hanging from his grasp for the longest time. But then he let go, and I was falling. Thrashing around in the tent, I woke Star. "Are you okay?" she was asking. "I'm okay," I said, barely coming to. "Just fell off a mountain, that's all." "That's not good, Jessie." "Well, I guess not, seeing as how we're going to be climbing a peak with ropes and all that stuff in a few hours." "Imaging can make things happen," she whispered. "You have to work on your images." "It's not like I can control my dreams, Star. I've had falling dreams since I was little." What I didn't tell her was they started right after my mother died. I'd told her enough. Unable to get back to sleep, I lay shivering and wondering if my dad had any idea that I still get those dreams. I told myself that the nightmare had nothing at all to do with actually falling, or with mountain climbing. Skiing doesn't scare me. Flying doesn't either. Mountain climbing, I told myself, I can do that if I have to. If Star, for crying out loud, if Star can do it, Then I can too. At breakfast, I drew Freddie for my climbing partner. I was relieved. As withdrawn as he wasn't an exciting companion, but he was a capable climber, probably the best among us. The 8 of us, with Al trailing, set out from the trees at dawn, trying to make as much time as we could before the weather turned bad, which it tended to do every day around noon. Troy, our navigator for the day, led the way, along with Heather, his climbing partner. When we cleared the trees, we couldn't see the peak. A high ridge, serrated and imposing, blocked our view. Troy started up the ridge, making good time. He didn't stop to look at his map, and he didn't ask anyone for a second opinion. I wondered if we should be conferencing the way Al wanted us to. But, like Troy, I was anxious to get on with it before the weather turned bad. Already the clouds were boiling up out of the blue skies. I walked 3 steps behind Freddie. I felt awkward with him. Freddie wasn't exactly an artist when it came to conversation. Anyway, he seemed content to ignore me. I had the feeling he was something of a wild man, and I was a little afraid of him, like maybe he had a violent streak and had committed some awful crime. He was the only guy, I noticed, that the big fella wouldn't wrestle with and sit on whenever he wanted to play or show dominance or whatever it was. Freddie had some kind of signal that said, "Don't touch." And even Pug, the sensitive soul that he was, could pick up on it. Freddie slowed a bit, and I thought for a moment that he wasn't sure if we were going the right way, but he said nothing. I stopped and caught my breath. Freddie sniffed the wind like an animal. He did that often. His jet-black eyes would focus, never on the people, but on the clouds and the peaks, on little gray birds flitting around, on rocks and dirt and trickling water. Someone said Freddie was from New Mexico. When Freddie did speak, it was in a musical Spanish accent. Like Pug, he never flirted with the girls, but unlike Pug, he didn't joke around with the guys either. Freddie was a loner. As I caught my breath, I watched Troy's bright shock of blonde hair bobbing as he chattered with Heather. I wondered what they were talking about. I was enjoying the walking, happy to have left my enormous backpack in the trees, and feeling weightless by comparison with only my day pack on my back, even if the slope was getting steep, and the air thinning by the moment. We were somewhere around 13,000 feet, heading for close to 14. Al bounded alongside us, appearing out of nowhere with a huge grin plastered across his face and a cheerful, "Great day, isn't it?" He wasn't even breathing hard. He's in his mid-40s, like my dad, and strong and lean as a whip. Even his gray hair is like that, I thought, springing out like steel wool from under his cap and jumping out of his nostrils and ears. There were moments when you almost wondered if you liked him, but those were the rare moments he wasn't killing you, and they passed quickly. "Say, look at this," Al said, and swooped to pick up a bit of bone, something I would never have had the energy to notice while climbing at 13,000 feet. "Power object," he proclaimed. Freddie, looking vaguely interested, slowed up as Al held it out for us to look at. "Bird bone. Hollow. What do you think, Jessie? You're a Colorado girl, from Boulder and all." "I'm too winded to even speak," I managed. "How am I going to think?" "Freddie?" My climbing partner shrugged. "Maybe a bit of Mr. Raven's wing, chewed by Mr. Coyote," Al theorized. He kept looking at Freddie as if Freddie should really know. Then he took the leather pouch that hung from around his neck, opened it, and dropped the bone fragment in among the rest of his power objects, whatever they might be. I could never tell if Al was as weird as he sounded, but I guessed that he was. He was always grinning. I had my own images of Vietnam vets, maybe from seeing too many movies, but I knew I didn't trust him. I didn't buy his premise that taking kids out in the mountains and making them suffer will fix what ails them. And to live the way he did, year in and year out, he had to be a madman. I sure wasn't going to respect him for it. So I was always off balance with him. I looked around for Star and Adam, but they were well behind. Adam would have milked some comedy out of the power object. It wasn't time for fun, it was time for technical climbing. We'd run out of walkable ground. Al dropped back to take up the rear on our true test and leave us to our own devices. As Freddie took his coil of rope off his shoulder, Troy waved us around him and Heather. The clouds were turning dark, and the wind was suddenly blowing hard. I could see the uncertainty in Heather's body language, even though she avoided my eyes. Words rarely failed her, but on this occasion she didn't say anything. Her partner motioned toward the face of the looming peak and said, "You lead, Freddie. Find us a route." I watched Troy as he said it. It was a tough admission for him. He was such a natural leader and such an able person physically. It was a defeat, having led all the way from camp, to have to follow now. I glanced to Freddie to see how he would take it. He shrugged. We broke out our nylon climbing harnesses and rigged them snug. Mine dug into my crotch a little. I hated it. I thought about how my father had never done any technical climbing in his life, and yet had blithely shipped me off to hoods in the woods, knowing that climbing was a lot of what they did. Carefully, I secured the rope to my harness. "Check my nut for me, would you, Freddie?" He looked me all over. "Okay," he grunted. Frightened, I adjusted my helmet with the strap under my chin and looked to Troy for reassurance. My fear had boiled up out of nowhere like the clouds, and I could taste it. Troy's eyes skittered away for once. He bent over and busied himself getting his rain gear and his helmet out of his day pack. Oh well, I thought. Here goes nothing. I can't believe that was my attitude, given my fear and my nightmares. But I'd always liked to push myself. Driving too fast, that goes without saying. Wanting to hang out with older guys. I'd wear all white, I'd wear all black. I'd wear my hair long, cut it off short, put a purple streak in it just for fun. I wasn't afraid of what people would think. My dad liked to say it was a natural stage that he had gone through too. Young people tend to see everything in extremes, not only in our society, and not just in modern times. They always did. Anthropologists talk like that. He's studied cultures all over the world, but mostly in books. He hasn't done any field work in his beloved Amazon since my mother died. You think in extremes, Jessie, he liked to tell me. Everything's either wonderful or it's blown. Freddie led the way, climbing easily if not gracefully, pausing here and there to hammer pitons into the rock. His stocky body seemed to hug the earth naturally. I'm Freddie's height, but I'm hollow-boned like Al's raven, and naturally defiant of gravity. I have a long-distance runner's stride. I've always been able to leap and jump, and I've always liked skiing because it set me free, left me attached only marginally to the ground. Now, as we started across the face of this peak, the depths were pulling powerfully at me from below, and I felt my strengths turning to weaknesses. Don't look down, Freddie cautioned from above me. His warning came too late. That's exactly what I'd just done, glanced at the drop. It had to be 1,000 feet. I'd seen the sharp boulders jutting at crazy angles at the bottom of Storm King Peak's north face, and they seemed to be rushing up to meet me. Jessie, don't look down. Too late. My stomach was in free fall already, and I was so dizzy I thought I might black out. Suddenly lightning broke from the blue-black sky, and thunder exploded almost instantaneously, with all the force of a sonic boom. I was aware of gasps and swearing from the rest of them. I knew I hadn't been hit by the lightning, but all the same, the sheer terror of the moment chased the strength from every fiber in me, and I was paralyzed. I glanced up. There was Freddie, with his shaggy black hair blowing in the wind, his face all lit up with a feral sort of joy born of the wild moment. Whoever he was, my life was now tied to his, and our eyes were locked together. He said, You can do it, Jessie. Move your right foot to that little spot over there, and your right hand to that finger hold. I can't, I whimpered. From behind me and below I heard Rita, the self-proclaimed thief of Brooklyn, holler the loudest stage whisper I'd heard in my life. "Jesse's got that sewing machine leg Al talked about." It was true. I was so afraid. The nerves in my right leg were buzzing, and the leg was twitching up and down. "Take a few deep breaths," encouraged Al. I glanced down and back toward the ridge, and saw an impression of his face, wide-eyed under his helmet. "Look at that leg shake!" I heard Pug yell from below. He obviously loved the spectacle of the jumping leg, but had no idea it was connected to my feelings. "Pug," Freddie called down, "keep your mouth shut." Pug yelled something back at Freddie. I could feel the spasms in my leg. I didn't need to look. What was worse, numbness was spreading through the rest of my body. "Everyone cool it except Freddie," ruled Al. "He's her climbing partner." I looked back and below the way I had come, looking for Troy. He was the only one I could trust. I was hugely relieved to see him appear behind Pug and Star. "Troy," I said desperately, "I'm in trouble. Help me." "Let me catch my breath," Troy answered. I looked up at Freddie, saw him grinning. His teeth flashed whiter than white against his dark skin and jet-black hair. Lightning snapped again, and the wind began to blow hard. "Whistle through your teeth and spit," Freddie offered. "That's what my father always used to say." Great. That really reassured me. I'm about to black out, about to fall off a mountain, and my only hope is this sawed-off criminal wild man who wants to make some kind of a joke. "I can't whistle," I muttered. I didn't know if I was more terrified or angry. None of this would be happening, I thought. I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Madeline. For 9 years, it had been just me and my father, and then she marched into his life and ruined everything. I was standing in what should have been a temporary spot, a little ledge wide enough for 1 foot, but both of mine had ended up there. I couldn't go forward and I couldn't go back. My center of gravity was out beyond the ledge and above that bottomless drop. Only my fingers held me, and the longer I clung to the rocks, the weaker they'd become. Now they'd gone numb, buzzing and weak, and about to let go. I felt as helpless as when my mother died. "Daddy," I thought, "your sugar plum is about to fall." I looked for Al once more and found his startled face. His expression confirmed my conviction that I couldn't hold on any longer. "Troy," I pleaded. There was no response. Why wasn't he doing anything? "Gotta make your move, Jesse," Freddie urged. The encouragement did a poor job of masking his alarm. "I can't," I cried. I had no strength. "It's a discovery program," I heard my father saying. "Jesse, you need to find yourself." As the clouds dropped and boiled around us, I felt the eeriest sensation. My hair stood out from my head, and all of my body tingled with electricity. A moment later, lightning struck again, and thunder shook the mountain. The rain broke, and the storm center hurled violent wind gusts and sheets of hail against the peak. "Go for it, Jesse," ordered Al's voice, and finally I did, with no confidence at all. I made a lunge to the right with my hands and a leg and tried to grab hold of something, anything. For a moment, my fingers scraped and clawed. My feet dug for a hold. And then I was falling. Suddenly I was caught up and spun end over end somehow, with my head down and my legs above me. My helmet banged against the wall, and I was looking straight down its dizzying, slick face. "I got you!" Freddie yelled. The climbing harness around my hips and between my legs dug in painfully. My life was in Freddie's hands. He was belaying me with the rope passed behind the small of his back, mustering whatever strength he could in his arms and shoulders, back and legs. If he let go, maybe the piton anchoring the rope would hold. Maybe it wouldn't. "Hang on," yelled Al. "Hang on, Freddie. I'm coming around." I heard the others react, the ones waiting behind and below. They were frightened and thrilled at the same time. as if they were witnessing a spectacular auto accident. "Hold her! Hang on, Jessie," Star called. "No way," Pug said. "He's not going to make it in time." "Don't say it," I heard Star plead. "You'll make it happen." Something was keeping Al. Star told me afterwards that he was having all kinds of trouble climbing above and past me by another route to Freddie's position. My hands reached out and fended my body off the cliff. "Freddie!" I screamed as I freed my face from the wall. "Freddie!" "I got you," he hollered. "I got you." His voice came out kind of strangled. I knew he was barely managing to hang on to me when I heard that. All the blood had rushed to my head. I was dangling there forever. It was taking too impossibly long. The way everyone was shouting, I knew Freddie must be losing his grip. Any moment now he'd have to drop me. I was so bewildered. Was I going to die? Star told me afterwards, Freddie was a sight to see. He's not that big, but he has wide shoulders and narrow hips, and all the muscles in his arms and neck were standing out like whipcord. She said she's never seen that kind of determination in her whole life. It did take forever, she said, but somehow Freddie held on, until finally Al scrambled down next to him. The two of them hauled me up enough so that I could right myself and work my way back across the ledge to Troy's grasp and safety. An hour later, the clouds opened and the sun shone on Storm King Peak. We were down below, having bailed out. No one, not even Al, brought up going for the peak after what had happened. So we'd failed what was supposed to have been the big event of the first stage of Discovery Unlimited. The rest were having a raging fight as they were eating lunch by the sign at the base of the mountain, the one that says, "Warning. Storm King Peak is infamous for its extreme weather, exposure, and rotten rock. 3 have died here. Think before you add your name to the list." People were yelling about how it all happened and what we should have done. Rita was born with a set of lungs, and she was exercising them in spades. A couple of octaves higher, Heather played her screeching violin for all it was worth, as if she could shred Al with her voice alone, while Pug thundered curses and bristled back and forth like a grizzly bear, uncertain whether it was bluffing or charging. But most of all, there was Troy. I'd never heard his voice raised before, and was he angry. "What do you mean, having us climb that lousy mountain? Man, look at the sign! 3 people died on Storm King. You could have got Jesse killed, idiot." "You picked the route, Troy, and it wasn't the one we planned last night." I was confused. So were the rest. They fell silent. "What do you mean?" Pug demanded. "The map, Troy. I guess you chose not to use it. That was a harder route than the one we discussed." Such a volley of curses I'd never heard in my life. "How come you didn't say something?" Pug asked. "Troy was the navigator today. You all know the rules." "I can't believe it," Rita shouted, beside herself. I looked over there and saw her right in Troy's face. "I can't believe him, and I can't believe you. You took us up the wrong way. We could have all been killed. Why didn't you look at your map, Troy?" Troy walked off. I couldn't blame Troy. Nobody else had helped him out. It was Al I was angry with, for risking my life just because of his stupid rules. Angry at my dad for letting him do it. And hating Madeline. I went over what I was going to tell my dad as soon as I got to a telephone. "Get me out of here," I rehearsed through clenched teeth. "Get me out of here." With a start, I looked up and saw that Freddie had sought me out. I was jumpy. What did he want? He didn't say anything at first. He sat down on a rock and looked out across the meadow, turned red and gold with the hard frosts of early October. He was watching a pika, a little animal like a ball of fur, scurry from rock to rock with a bunch of grass in its mouth. "We call them rock rabbits," he said finally. I didn't say anything. I wished he would leave me alone. Obviously, he thought he was entitled to hit on me because he'd saved my life. "You know what he's doing with that grass?" Freddie asked in his musical accent. "No, I don't know what he's doing with that grass," I said flatly. He looked at me like maybe he would leave, but he explained, "They don't hibernate. They run around all winter under the snow. They have to have something to eat, so they cut grass and dry it all summer and take it underground. They're hay farmers." "I never heard that before," I said sarcastically. "Now, if I say thank you, will you leave me alone?" He was really embarrassed. He stood up quickly. "I just wanted to—" "Oh, forget it." He left, and I felt like a complete heel.